My alarm went off at 6:30 a.m., but I was already awake. I lay there staring at the ceiling, running through lines of code in my head that refused to form a working algorithm. Miramar woke up with me. I could already hear the first cars rushing by outside, hurrying to start their morning routines. I reached for my glasses on the nightstand and paused for a second to look at the framed photo. 3 years ago, graduation from the technical university. I'm smiling stiffly. My mom is looking off to the side. My dad is checking his phone. A typical Edmonds family photo. "Prue, are you up yet?" My mother's voice sounded the same as always from the kitchen, with a hint of irritation. "Yes," I replied curtly, pulling on my sweater. I had been living with my parents for 4 months after my last roommate suddenly decided to move in with his girlfriend. It was a temporary solution that had dragged on because of the crazy rent prices in Miramar. Every morning, I reminded myself that it wouldn't be for long. A couple more months and I'd be able to afford my own place, especially if my project worked out. My mom was cooking something in the kitchen, tapping the cutting board sharply and nervously with a knife. "Were you up late again on your computer?" she asked without turning around. "You'll ruin your eyes." "I was working on a project," I said, pouring myself some coffee and trying to move quietly. "You'd be better off working on your personal life," my mom sighed. "You're 26 years old, and all you do is work on your programs. Take Abigail, for example." I stopped listening. The story about my mother's friend Abigail, who married a promising lawyer at 23, had become a ritual of our morning meetings. I nodded mechanically at the right moments, finishing my coffee and planning my day. "And what are you going to do with your life, Prudence?" My mother finished her tirade. "I have a plan," I said, putting my cup in the sink. "I have to get to work." At the kitchen door, I bumped into my father. He gave me his usual appraising look. "You could at least comb your hair before you leave," he said instead of greeting me. "People in decent company pay attention to their appearance." I nodded silently and went into the bathroom. I gathered my unruly red hair into a ponytail, pausing for a second in front of the mirror. My pale face was covered with freckles and dark circles under my eyes. My father was right. I didn't look good. But I had a code to write, not a beauty contest to win. The Nextech Solutions office was a 20-minute bus ride from our house. The company occupied 2 floors in a mid-range business center. Not quite a startup, but far from a corporation. 50 developers, designers, and managers trying to create the next big thing in the world of technology. So far, without success. I had been working here for 2 years, right after college. A junior developer, one of many. Invisible in the office hierarchy, and that suited me just fine. "Good morning, Prue." Zeke Talbot, system administrator, the only person I regularly interacted with in the office, waved at me cheerfully. "You're early today. I want to finish one module before the general meeting." I smiled at him. Zeke was a nice guy, a little socially awkward like me, but sincere. "Oh, the secret app?" he winked. "How's it coming along?" "I've almost finished the main functionality." I lowered my voice. "But let's not talk about it here." Zeke nodded understandingly and returned to his computer. He was the only one I had told about my side project. It was an app for small businesses that could simplify logistics and tracking for companies that didn't have the resources to implement expensive corporate solutions. The idea came to me 6 months ago when I was helping my cousin with her small flower shop. I saw how she struggled with accounting, deliveries, and demand forecasting, and realized that I could create something useful. I quietly developed the app in my spare time. Technically, under my contract, everything I created belonged to Nextech, but I planned to present the finished product to management and negotiate a share of the profits if it was successful. Naive, perhaps, but it was my chance to break out of the rut and prove my worth. By 9 o'clock, the office was full of people. I sat in my corner, shut off from the world with my headphones, working on a demand forecasting algorithm. This part of the app could be its biggest selling point. Using simple historical sales data, the system could predict future demand with 80% accuracy. "Edmonds," a sharp voice pulled me out of my stream of code. I looked up and saw Lloyd Niven, our department head. Lloyd was the type of manager who thought of himself as a great visionary, but in reality, he was just good at talking and shifting responsibility onto his subordinates. In his early 40s, always dressed in perfectly tailored suits, with a neatly trimmed beard streaked with gray, he made a good impression on clients and investors. Within the company, he was either idolized by ambitious newbies or quietly despised by veterans who knew the true value of his ideas. "I see you're very busy," he said, leaning against the partition of my office. "Something interesting?" I quickly closed the window with my app code. "I'm working on optimizing the algorithm for the Henderson project," I lied. Lloyd squinted as if trying to look at my screen over my shoulder. "The general meeting is in 15 minutes, don't be late," he said, pausing for a second before adding, "By the way, I've been wanting to talk to you about your potential in the company. Can you stay after work today?" It was strange. In 2 years, Lloyd had barely exchanged 100 words with me, and now he was suddenly interested in my potential? "Sure," I replied, trying to hide my surprise. He smiled, revealing perfectly white teeth, and walked away to the next victim of his managerial attention. The meeting proceeded as usual. Lloyd talked about the company's great future, presented quarterly goals, and motivated the team to work even harder. I sat in the far corner of the conference room, pretending to listen attentively while continuing to mentally refine my algorithm. "And we have several promising areas that we will present to investors next week." Lloyd's voice brought me back to reality. "I am counting on each of you to give your all." After the meeting, I returned to my desk and immersed myself in my work. The day flew by. I skipped lunch, too absorbed in solving a problem in the code. When I finally looked up from my monitor, the office was empty. The clock showed 6:15 p.m. "Still here?" Zeke stopped at my desk. "How's the secret project coming along?" "Almost done," I said, stretching my stiff neck. "I just need to finish the user interface and do some final testing. When do you plan to present it to the boss?" "Next week, I think." I saved my files and closed the development environment. "Lloyd wanted to talk to me today, by the way." Zeke frowned. "Be careful with him, Prue. He's not the type to appreciate other people's ideas." "I know," I smiled. "Don't worry. I've got it under control." Zeke left, and I started getting ready, wondering what Lloyd wanted to talk to me about. Maybe he had found out about my project somehow? Or was it just a routine manager's chat about the future? I decided to use the restroom before the meeting. As I passed the conference room, I heard Lloyd's voice. The door was ajar, and I automatically slowed down. "An innovative solution for small businesses," he said. "We conducted a comprehensive market analysis and identified a need that no one has yet adequately met." I froze in place. It sounded suspiciously similar to my project. "And how accurate are your forecasting algorithms?" asked another voice, one I didn't recognize. "The accuracy of our forecasts is as high as 80%, even with minimal historical data," Lloyd replied proudly. "We used advanced machine learning techniques." I gasped. This was my project, my idea, my algorithm. How did he find out? I took a step closer to the door, trying to move silently. "Sounds promising," said a third voice, female. "When are you planning a full demonstration?" "Next Thursday," Lloyd replied. "We'll have a fully functional prototype. I personally oversaw the development at every stage." I covered my mouth with my hand to keep from giving myself away. Anger and resentment rose within me like a hot wave. "And the team?" asked the first voice. "Oh, it's standard development procedure," Lloyd replied casually. "Several junior programmers worked on separate modules under my supervision. None of them have seen the whole picture." "Clever," said the female voice approvingly. "That's how you protect intellectual property." "Exactly," Lloyd said smugly. "By the way, I'm planning a little reorganization before the final stage. Some employees, let's just say they've served their purpose." "Layoffs?" asked a male voice. "I prefer the term staff optimization." Lloyd smiled. "There's one girl, Edmonds, who was working on part of the algorithm, but her participation is no longer required. It could be a problem if she realizes what she was actually working on." "I understand," said a female voice. "Better to be proactive." "Absolutely," agreed Lloyd. "This issue will be resolved by the demo." I stepped back from the door, feeling the blood pounding in my temples. My project, 6 months of my life, My idea. And Lloyd hadn't just stolen it. He had planned to get rid of me so I couldn't claim it. I quietly left the conference room and headed for the exit, forgetting about the restroom. I needed to think fast. Lloyd had obviously gained access to my files somehow, maybe through a shared server, or when I was away from my computer. One thought ran through my head. What should I do now? Go to management? But who would believe me? An inconspicuous junior developer or a charismatic department head? I didn't even have irrefutable proof that the idea was mine. I had developed the project on company equipment during company time. Stepping outside, I took a deep breath of the cool evening air. Panic gradually gave way to cold rage. I wouldn't let Lloyd Niven steal my work and throw me away like a piece of trash. I had a trump card he didn't know about. Anticipating potential problems, I had built a special defense mechanism into the heart of the program. Without a specific activation key known only to me, critical components would not function properly. They would appear functional during superficial testing, but under real load, the system would fail. My phone vibrated in my pocket. A message from Lloyd. "Where are you? I'm waiting for you in my office to talk." I smiled for the first time in the last hour. Let him think everything is going according to his plan. I returned to the building, preparing myself for a difficult conversation and knowing that now the game would be played by my rules. I took a deep breath as I stood in front of Lloyd's office door. A hurricane of emotions was raging inside me, but I tried to remain calm on the outside. I knocked twice and entered without waiting for a response. Lloyd was sitting at his massive dark wood desk, which seemed to have been specially chosen to emphasize his status. He looked up from his monitor and smiled his trademark smile, the one that charmed clients and made newbies feel special. "Ah, Prudence, finally," he said, pointing to the chair across from him. "Have a seat." I sat down silently, watching his face closely. I wondered how long he had been planning this betrayal. When exactly had he decided that my work was valuable enough to steal? "I wanted to talk about your future with the company," Lloyd began, leaning back in his chair. "You've been with us for 2 years now, right?" 2 years and 3 months, I clarified. "Yes, of course," he said, pretending to remember the exact date I started. "You know, I've been watching your work lately. You're talented." He said the last word as if he were doing me a huge favor by acknowledging it. I suppressed a smile. 20 minutes ago, he hadn't even mentioned my name in connection with the project, and now he had suddenly noticed my talent. "Thanks," I replied dryly. "There are changes coming to the company," Lloyd continued, tapping his fingers on the table. "We're refocusing on new markets, new products. I think you'll be interested to know that we're developing an innovative solution for small businesses." He watched my reaction closely. Was he checking to see if I knew anything? Or did he just want to see my excitement at him, deigning to share his big plans with me? "Sounds interesting," I said, trying to sound neutral. "More than interesting." Lloyd leaned forward. "It's a revolutionary solution. I'm personally leading the development. And you know what? I'm thinking of offering you a position on the project." So that's what it was. He didn't just want to steal my idea. He wanted me to help him do it, unaware that I was working on my own invention. The irony of the situation was almost comical. "Really?" I feigned surprise. "What exactly do you do?" Lloyd hesitated for a second, then said with feigned nonchalance, "Logistics, demand forecasting, supply chain optimization, everything a small business needs, but in an affordable format." An accurate description of my project. I was seething inside, but I kept a straight face. "Sounds familiar," I said, looking him straight in the eye. For a moment, a look of concern flashed across his face, but he quickly regained his composure. "You may have heard me discussing this with the team. The project has been in the works for several months," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "In any case, I would like you to join us. Your skills could be useful in the final stages." "What about the initial stages?" I asked. "Who worked on the basic concept and algorithms?" Lloyd frowned slightly. "It was a team effort under my supervision." He hesitated. "Listen, Prudence, why are you asking these questions? I'm offering you the opportunity to be part of something big. It's a chance for your career." I nodded thoughtfully, as if weighing his offer. "When is the investor presentation?" "Next Thursday," he replied automatically, and then his eyes narrowed. "How did you know about the presentation?" I realized I had made a mistake, but it was too late to back down. "I overheard your conversation in the conference room," I admitted. "Quite an interesting conversation, especially the part about staff optimization." Lloyd's face changed. The mask of a benevolent mentor disappeared, giving way to cold calculation. "It's not nice to eavesdrop, Edmonds." His voice became harsh. "Neither is stealing other people's ideas," I retorted. We stared at each other for several long seconds. The tension in the room was palpable. "I don't know what you're talking about," he finally said. "Really?" I leaned forward. "Let's get this straight. You somehow gained access to my project, a small business app I've been working on for the past 6 months. You copied my code, my algorithms, my idea, and now you're presenting it as your own to investors. And you plan to fire me to get rid of any potential problems. Am I missing something?" Lloyd didn't answer. He just looked at me, assessing the situation, weighing his options. Then the corners of his mouth lifted into a condescending smile. "What proof do you have?" he asked. "You developed this project during work hours, on company equipment. According to your contract, everything you create while working for the company belongs to Nextech. Even if you can prove that the idea was yours, which is unlikely, the program still belongs to the company." He was right, and we both knew it. Legally, I had no rights to my creation. "What's more," Lloyd continued, clearly sensing that he had the upper hand, "you violated protocol by working on an outside project without management approval. That's a serious violation." "Outside?" I couldn't hold back a bitter laugh. "A minute ago, you were offering me a position on your project, and now it's my project again? Make up your mind, Lloyd." His face flushed slightly with anger, but he maintained control. "Enough, Edmonds. The situation is perfectly clear. The project will be presented to investors under my leadership. That decision is final. As for your future with the company..." He paused. "I think we'll have to part ways." I had expected this, but I still felt a pang of hurt. 2 years of work, and just like that, goodbye, Prudence. "On what grounds?" I asked, even though the answer was obvious. "Unauthorized use of company resources, breach of confidentiality, inappropriate behavior." He listed the charges with obvious pleasure. "Take your pick." I remained silent, considering my next move. Part of me wanted to stand up and tell him everything I thought about him and his methods. Another part reminded me of the protective mechanism built into the code, my secret trump card. "I understand," I said finally. "When do you want me to leave?" My calm tone seemed to surprise him. Was he expecting tears? Protests? Threats? "Immediately," Lloyd replied, quickly regaining his composure. "Human Resources will prepare all the necessary documents. You will receive your severance pay as per your contract." I nodded and stood up. "Well, good luck with the presentation," I said, heading for the door. "Prudence," Lloyd called after me. I turned around. "Your laptop, you need to turn it in before you leave. It's company property." Of course. My work laptop, which contained all my project files. He wanted to make sure I didn't have any copies. "Of course," I replied. "I'll bring it in a minute." Back at my desk, I quickly assessed the situation. I had backup copies of the code, one on an external hard drive at home, the other in encrypted cloud storage. But the activation key needed for the program to work properly existed only in my head. I had never written it down. I turned on my laptop and quickly checked that all the project files were still there. Lloyd had probably already copied them, but I needed to make sure the security mechanism wasn't compromised. Everything looked normal. Without the activation key entered in a specific place in the code, the system would not work properly under heavy load, exactly the kind of load that would occur during a demonstration to investors. "Are you leaving?" Zeke's voice snapped me out of my thoughts. He was standing next to my desk, looking at me with concern. "I got fired," I replied quietly. "What? Why?" His eyes widened. "Lloyd stole my project." I quickly explained the situation while gathering my personal belongings. Zeke whistled. "That bastard," he muttered. What are you going to do? I closed my laptop and stood up. I have a plan, I said with confidence I didn't really feel. Don't worry. But your project? Everything will be fine, Zeke, I smiled weakly. Really? He looked unconvinced but nodded. Keep me posted, okay? And if you need any help... Thanks, I said, sincerely grateful for his support. You're a real friend. I gave him a quick hug and headed for Lloyd's office with my laptop under my arm. As I passed my colleagues, I noticed their curious glances. News traveled fast in an office. By morning, everyone would know that Prudence Edmonds had been fired for inappropriate behavior. Lloyd was waiting for me, talking on the phone. When he saw me, he quickly ended the conversation. Ah, the laptop, he said, holding out his hand. I hope you didn't delete any files? Everything's there. I handed him the computer, including my project. He grimaced slightly at the mention of the project, but quickly regained his composure. Great. He put the laptop on the desk. HR will contact you about the paperwork. I nodded and turned toward the door, but stopped in the doorway. You know, Lloyd, I said, without turning around, you could have just asked me to cooperate. We could have worked on this project together. I would have been happy if my idea had been recognized. There was a pause. Business is a cruel game, Prudence, he finally replied. Nothing personal. I turned and looked him in the eye. Every action has consequences, I said calmly. I hope you're prepared for yours. His gaze became wary. Is that a threat? Just an observation. I shrugged. Good luck tomorrow with the investor presentation. I left the office without waiting for his reply. As I left Nextech Solutions, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. Bitterness at the betrayal, anger at Lloyd, anxiety about the future, but also relief. It was as if a heavy weight had been lifted from my shoulders. It was already dark outside. I took a deep breath of the evening air and took out my phone. Several missed calls from my mom. She probably wanted to know when I was coming home. I wasn't ready to talk to her, not now when I needed to think about my next steps. I headed for the bus stop, mentally making a plan of action. First, find a temporary job to pay the bills, while I decided what to do with the stolen project. Second, prepare for the inevitable call from Lloyd when he discovered that the program wasn't working properly. Third, decide what I really wanted to achieve. The bus arrived, and I took a seat by the window, watching the lights of Miramar flash by. The city looked the same as always, but my life had changed irrevocably in the last few hours. My phone vibrated. A message from Zeke. How are you? What can I do to help? I smiled. At least I had one real friend in this city. I'm fine, I replied. I'll tell you the details tomorrow. Another message, this time from an unknown number. Miss Edmonds, my name is Vince Holloway. I was at a meeting with Mr. Niven today. I would like to talk to you about a few things. Please call me when you have a moment. Holloway? The name sounded familiar. I tried to remember where I had heard it before. Then it dawned on me. Vince Holloway was one of the investors Lloyd had been talking to. How did he get my number, and what did he want from me? I decided not to respond right away. First, I needed to find out more about this man and his intentions. Maybe it was a trap set by Lloyd. The bus stopped 3 blocks from my house. I got out and walked slowly down the familiar streets, enjoying the quiet and cool evening. Part of me was afraid to go home and explain to my parents that I had lost my job. Another part knew it was inevitable. My phone vibrated again. This time it was a call, Lloyd's number. I smiled and declined the call. Too early. He couldn't have figured out the problem with the code yet. Something else must have made him call. Maybe he sensed something in my last words? Or did he want to make sure I wasn't planning on causing any trouble? Either way, I wasn't ready to talk to him. There would be time for that conversation tomorrow, when his presentation didn't go according to plan. I turned off the sound on my phone and put it in my pocket. My house was in sight, a typical 2-story detached house in a quiet neighborhood in Miramar. The lights were on in several windows. My parents were awake, waiting for me. I took a deep breath, preparing myself for the inevitable questions and judgmental looks. Losing my job was tantamount to personal failure in the eyes of my family, especially for my father, who had always expected more from me. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a strange sense of calm. Yes, I had lost my job. Yes, my idea had been stolen, but I wasn't a helpless victim. I had a plan, and I was going to see it through. I smiled, imagining Lloyd's face tomorrow when his revolutionary solution failed right in front of the investors. That would only be the beginning. With that thought, I climbed the steps to the porch and opened the door to my house, ready for a new chapter in my life. Sunlight streamed through the loosely drawn curtains, casting whimsical patterns on the floor. I woke up much later than usual. The clock showed 12:10 in the morning. A strange feeling of freedom enveloped me. For the first time in 2 years, I didn't have to rush to the office, listen to endless meetings, and pretend to be interested in the corporate goals of Nextech Solutions. I stretched and sat up in bed, remembering the previous evening. The conversation with my parents had gone exactly as I had expected. My mother's bewilderment was replaced by my father's disappointment. "Fired? For what?" My mother threw her hands up as if I had told her I had a terminal illness. "For unauthorized use of company resources." I decided not to go into details. The less they knew, the fewer questions they would ask. I knew it. My father shook his head with the look of a man whose worst predictions had come true. "I always told you you lacked discipline. Decent companies value order." I didn't argue. What was the point of explaining that order at Nextech meant allowing people like Lloyd to steal other people's ideas with impunity and throw people away when they were no longer needed? Instead, I assured them that I had a couple of months' worth of savings and that I was already looking for a new job. The half-truth calmed them down enough to leave me alone until morning. I picked up the phone, which I had turned off before going to bed. When I turned it on, I saw a barrage of notifications, 7 missed calls from Lloyd, 3 voicemails, and several texts. My lips curled into a smile. The first message was sent yesterday at 10:47 p.m. "Call me back urgently, we need to talk." The second was at 11:15 p.m. "Edmonds, I know you're seeing these messages. This is serious." The third, from this morning at 7:20 a.m. "I know you did something to the program. If you don't fix it immediately, I'm going to sue you for sabotage." I listened to the voice messages. In the first one, Lloyd was still trying to remain calm, although the tension in his voice was obvious. In the second one, he was no longer hiding his irritation. In the third one, left today at 8:30, his voice sounded downright panicked. "Prudence, the presentation is in 3 hours and the program is throwing errors every time I run a test. What have you done? I don't care about our differences, but the company's reputation is at stake. Call me back." I put the phone down and stretched again, enjoying the moment. My defense mechanism worked exactly as I had planned. The program seemed to function normally during simple tests, but when performing more complex operations or under heavy load, the system began to malfunction. My phone vibrated. Another call from Lloyd. This time I decided to answer. "Good morning, Mr. Niven," I said calmly. "Where the hell are you?" he growled. "I've been calling you since last night." "I was asleep," I replied calmly. "It's my day off." "You fired me, remember?" I could practically hear him clenching his teeth on the other end of the line. "What did you do to the program?" His voice was quieter, but I could hear the anger he was trying to hide. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, trying to sound surprised. "Is there something wrong with your project?" "Don't play games with me, Edmonds," Lloyd hissed. "The system was working perfectly until yesterday. Today it's throwing errors with every major operation. Coincidence? I don't think so." "Maybe there's a problem with the code?" I suggested innocently. "Software development is a complex process. Bugs happen." "Stop it!" he was almost shouting now. "I know you did something. Fix it immediately, or I'll make sure you never get hired by a tech company in this city again." I paused, giving him time to realize the futility of his threats. "Listen, Lloyd," I said finally. "We both know what happened. You stole my project and fired me to get rid of the trouble. Now you have a presentation to investors and your stolen program doesn't work. What exactly do you want from me?" He was silent for a few seconds, clearly struggling with himself. "Come to the office," he finally said. "Right now. Fix the program. I'll pay you as a consultant." I laughed. "A consultant? Seriously? You stole my intellectual property and now you want to hire me as a consultant?" $5,000, he said desperately. "Cash. Today." "It's not about the money, Lloyd," I replied. "It's about the principle. You took my idea, my code, my work, and passed it off as your own. And then you fired me when I became inconvenient." "What do you want?" he hissed. I thought about it. What did I really want? Go back to a company where the boss was capable of such betrayal? Hardly. Money? It wouldn't solve the main problem, the stolen authorship. "I want recognition," I said finally. "Public recognition that the idea and the development are mine." "Impossible," he said. "I've already presented the project to management as my own. The investors are expecting a presentation in—" I heard him glance at his watch. 2 hours and 40 minutes. "Then we have a problem," I replied calmly. "Because without me, the program won't work." 10,000, he offered, "and a written agreement that you participated in the development." Participated? I shook my head, though he couldn't see it. "No, Lloyd. Either full recognition of my authorship or nothing." "You don't understand what you're getting yourself into," he said, his voice tinged with undisguised menace. "I'll destroy your reputation. No one would believe a junior developer accusing the head of a department of stealing an idea." "Maybe," I agreed, "but the program still won't work, and your reputation will be ruined too when you can't demonstrate the promised functionality to investors." There was a long pause. I could almost hear the wheels turning in Lloyd's head as he considered his options. "All right," he finally conceded. "Come to the office. We'll work something out." "I'll be there in an hour," I said, and hung up without waiting for his reply. I quickly got dressed, choosing my best business suit. Dark blue, conservative but elegant. I pulled my hair back into a neat bun and put on minimal makeup. Today, I wanted to look professional and confident. My parents weren't home. My father was at work and my mother was at her book club. I left a note saying I had an interview and went out. The weather matched my mood: bright sunshine, cloudless skies, and a light, refreshing breeze. On the way to the office, I received a message from Zeke. "There's something going on here. Lloyd is on edge, running around the office like a madman. Everyone is getting ready for the presentation, and the system keeps crashing. Is this your work?" I smiled and replied, "Maybe. I'll be there soon." Another message caught my attention, from Vince Holloway himself. "Miss Edmonds, I hope you received my message yesterday. I would very much like to talk to you about your work at Next Tech. I will be at Mr. Niven's presentation today. Perhaps we could meet afterwards." This was getting interesting. How did the investor find out about my involvement in the project? I decided not to respond yet. I had to deal with Lloyd first. The Next Tech office greeted me with unusual excitement. Employees were rushing back and forth, setting up extra chairs in the conference room, and someone was setting up a projector. I walked past my former workplace. It already looked empty, as if I had never been there. Zick noticed me and almost ran up to me, his eyes burning with excitement. "Did you really do something with the program?" he whispered. "I thoughtfully built in a protective mechanism," I replied quietly. "Without a specific key, the system doesn't work properly under heavy load." "Genius!" Zeke exclaimed admiringly. "Lloyd is furious. He's already called the outsourced developers twice, but they can't find the problem." "Where is he now?" "In his office. He locked himself in there with the technical director half an hour ago." I nodded and headed for Lloyd's office. On the way, I caught curious glances from my colleagues. Obviously, my return to the office after yesterday's dismissal had become the main topic of gossip. I knocked on the office door. Lloyd's voice barked, "Come in!" Inside, chaos reigned. Lloyd and the technical director, Harris Woods, were hunched over a laptop, surrounded by printouts of code and empty coffee cups. Edmonds, finally." Lloyd looked exhausted. His usually perfectly ironed shirt was wrinkled, his tie was loose, and his hair was tousled. "Harris, leave us." The technical director gave me a curious look and left, closing the door tightly behind him. So, Lloyd folded his arms across his chest. I'm willing to discuss a compromise. I'm listening, I said, remaining standing, not accepting his unspoken invitation to sit down. You fix the program, he began. I'll present you to the investors as the key developer on the project. You get a bonus of $20,000 and a promotion to senior developer, and we'll forget about this misunderstanding. I shook my head. Not enough. I want full credit for my work, and a share in the project if it gets funded. Lloyd clenched his fists. That's impossible. I've already presented the project as my initiative. Then the presentation won't happen, I shrugged. At least not today. You don't understand. His voice became almost pleading. These investors won't wait. If we postpone the presentation, they'll go to our competitors. This is a chance for the company, for all of us. For everyone except the real author of the idea, I remarked. Lloyd ran his hand over his face, as if wiping away fatigue. All right, he said finally. I'll present you as the co-author of the project. 50-50, and you'll get 10% of the investment if it goes through. I thought about it. The offer wasn't bad. Financially, it was even lucrative. But it wasn't just about the money. Co-author? I asked. You're still claiming half the credit for an idea that was stolen in its entirety? Listen, Prudence. Lloyd changed tactics, his voice becoming almost fatherly. That's not how business works. Nobody gets everything. This is a compromise that benefits both sides. You get recognition, money, a promotion. I save face. The company gets the investment. Everyone wins. I looked at him, trying to understand how a person could so casually offer a compromise after blatant theft. But perhaps it was this ability that had made him successful in the corporate world. 70-30, I said. I get 70% of the authorship, you get 30, and 15% of the investment. Lloyd frowned, but I could see in his eyes that he was ready to agree. Time was running out, and he had no other options. It's a deal, he said, holding out his hand. Now fix the program. We have less than 2 hours before the presentation. I didn't shake his hand. A written agreement first, I said. Draft the document while I look at the code. He nodded reluctantly and began typing on his computer while I sat down at my laptop with the program. The code was exactly as I had left it, with a carefully hidden protection mechanism that activated under certain conditions. While Lloyd was busy drafting the agreement, I quickly checked his email, which was open in another window. There, I found correspondence with investors, including Vince Holloway. In one of the emails, Lloyd mentioned that his team of developers was working on the project without naming any specific names. But in an earlier email, dated 3 weeks earlier, there was a draft where he admitted that the idea came from one of the junior developers, a girl with a great understanding of small business needs. So that's how Holloway found out about me. Lloyd let it slip in his early correspondence, then tried to cover his tracks. Here. Lloyd handed me a printed document. Standard collaboration agreement. You acknowledge that you are the primary author of the project with 70% authorship, and I am the co-author with 30%. You receive 15% of the investment and are reinstated to your position with a promotion to senior developer. I read the document carefully. Everything looked exactly as we had agreed, although I had no doubt that Lloyd would try to find loopholes later. But right now, I had the upper hand, and I intended to use it. Okay. I signed the agreement and handed it to him to sign. Now I'll fix the program. Lloyd signed the document with relief and gave me a copy. How long will that take? He asked, glancing at his watch. The investors will be here in an hour and 20 minutes. 10 minutes, I replied, returning to my laptop. Don't worry, the program will work perfectly. I opened a special configuration file hidden deep in the project structure and entered the activation key, a long string of characters that only I knew. The system responded immediately, changing several critical parameters. I ran a test. Everything worked flawlessly. Done, I said, turning to Lloyd. You can check it. He approached the laptop skeptically and ran several test operations. The program worked without a hitch. What did you do? He asked, looking up from the screen at me. Just fixed a bug, I replied innocently. Sometimes the solution is right there. You just have to know where to look. Lloyd clearly didn't believe me, but he was more concerned about the upcoming presentation than my methods. Okay, he said, straightening up. Let's get ready for the presentation. You'll be introduced as the lead developer on the project. And the main author of the idea, I reminded him. And the main author of the idea, he repeated reluctantly. We left the office and headed for the conference room, where preparations for the presentation were already underway. My colleagues watched our joint appearance with surprise. Zeke caught my eye and gave me a thumbs up. The next hour passed in a flurry of preparations. I checked the demo version of the program, making sure everything was working smoothly. Lloyd rehearsed his speech, glancing nervously at me from time to time, as if afraid that I would change my mind at the last minute and sabotage the presentation. At 11:30, the investors began to arrive, men and women in formal suits with the sharp eyes of people accustomed to assessing potential profits at a glance. Among them, I noticed a tall, gray-haired man who was watching me closely. From the description I found online while preparing, I recognized him as Vince Holloway, a venture capitalist with a reputation for finding real talent. The presentation began at noon sharp. Lloyd stepped out in front of the audience with a rehearsed smile and impeccable posture. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for taking the time to join us today, he began. At Nextech Solutions, we pride ourselves on finding innovative solutions to real problems. And today, I am pleased to introduce a project that I am confident will change the way thousands of small businesses across the country do business. He paused for effect, scanning the audience. But before we get into the details, I'd like to introduce you to the person without whom this project would not have been possible. The original idea and lead developer is Prudence Edmonds. I felt all eyes turn to me. Lloyd said those words with such enthusiasm, as if he had always planned to share the glory with me. No one in the room could have guessed the drama that had unfolded behind the scenes just an hour earlier. I stood up and nodded slightly to the audience, trying to look confident, even though my heart was pounding like crazy. This was my moment, the recognition I had been striving for. Miss Edmonds has developed an innovative demand forecasting algorithm that is at the heart of our system, Lloyd continued. Thanks to her vision and technical expertise, we have created a solution that makes complex logistics processes accessible even to the smallest companies. The presentation continued. Lloyd demonstrated the program's functionality, and I occasionally supplemented his remarks with technical information. The system worked flawlessly, and I could see the investors perk up, exchange glances, and take notes. Vince Holloway seemed particularly interested, never taking his eyes off me. After the presentation, a question-and-answer session began. Most of the questions were directed at Lloyd, but a few were directed at me, especially those concerning technical aspects. I answered clearly and confidently, feeling my authority grow in the eyes of the investors with each answer. When the official part was over, informal networking began. Lloyd moved from one potential investor to another, turning on the full charm. I stood aside, not quite sure of my role in this part of the event. Miss Edmonds? A deep voice made me turn around. Standing in front of me was Vince Holloway. Finally, we meet in person. I'm Vince Holloway. Nice to meet you, Mr. Holloway, I said, shaking his outstretched hand. You wanted to talk to me? Yes, very much, he smiled. I'm impressed with your work. The forecasting algorithm you developed is exactly what the market needs right now. Thank you. I was surprised by his directness. I'm glad you see the potential in the project. Not just the potential of the project, he lowered his voice, but your potential, Miss Edmonds. I was interested to learn that you are the main author of the idea, especially considering that yesterday, Mr. Niven presented the project as entirely his own. I tensed, not knowing how to respond. Mr. Niven and I clarified some points regarding authorship this morning, I replied cautiously. Holloway nodded understandingly. I thought so, especially after I received an anonymous letter stating that you, not Mr. Niven, were the real author of the project. I blinked in surprise. An anonymous letter? Who could have sent it? Zeke? Or had one of my colleagues noticed what I'd been working on for the past few months? In any case, Holloway continued, I'd like to discuss the possibility of working together. Not with Nextech, but with you personally. With me? I couldn't hide my surprise. Exactly, he he smiled. "I head the venture capital fund Holloway Innovations. We specialize in supporting talented developers and innovators, and I would like to offer you funding and support to develop your idea without corporate restrictions and without co-authors who tend to take credit for other people's achievements." I didn't know what to say. This was exactly what I had been dreaming of, the opportunity to develop my project independently, with adequate support, and without having to share the authorship with Lloyd. "That's a very generous offer, Mr. Holloway," I finally said. "But I have a contract with Nextech, and I just signed an agreement with Mr. Niven. Contracts can be terminated, especially if one of the parties is not acting in good faith." Holloway took a business card out of his pocket and handed it to me. "Think about my offer. Call me when you're ready to discuss the details. I have lawyers who can help you with your current situation." I took the card, feeling hope rise inside me. Maybe all those months of work and yesterday's humiliation hadn't been for nothing. Maybe this was my chance to really change my life. "Thank you," I said sincerely. "I'll be sure to get in touch." Holloway nodded and walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I turned the business card over in my hands, examining the elegant Holloway Innovations logo and contact information. It was unexpected and almost too good to be true. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Lloyd approaching. He was smiling, but his eyes remained cold. "What did you talk about with Holloway?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "He congratulated me on my presentation," I replied, discreetly slipping the business card into my pocket. "He was interested in the technical details." Lloyd narrowed his eyes, as if trying to determine whether I was telling the truth. "The investors are impressed," he said finally. "Especially Holloway and Anderson's group. I think we'll get the funding." "We?" I couldn't suppress the irony. "Yes, we," he lowered his voice. "Don't forget, we have an agreement. 70-30. You get your 15% of the investment." I nodded, not wanting to argue now. Maybe I wouldn't have to worry about that agreement if Holloway's offer turned out to be real. "Of course," I said, "as long as you honor the terms of our agreement." "Don't you trust me?" Lloyd feigned offense. "After I introduced you as the lead writer to all the investors? After you stole my project and fired me?" I parried quietly. "No, not particularly." His smile became strained. "Business is business, Prudence. Nothing personal, but now we're partners, and we need to learn to work together." "We'll see," I replied evasively. The presentation ended half an hour later. The investors left, promising to be in touch in the coming days. The Nextech employees began to disperse. For them, it was just another workday. Lloyd took me aside before I left. "Tomorrow at 9, he said. "We'll discuss the next steps for the project and your new role in the company." "I'll be there," I replied, knowing that this conversation might never happen. As I left the office, I took a deep breath of fresh air. I was filled with conflicting emotions: pride at the recognition of my work, bitterness at Lloyd's betrayal, excitement at Holloway's unexpected offer. I took out my phone and dialed Zeke. "Hi, how did it go?" "Better than I expected," I replied. Lloyd acknowledged my authorship in front of the investors. We signed an agreement. "Seriously?" Zeke couldn't hide his surprise. "I didn't think he'd go for it." "He had no choice," I smiled. "But that's not all. Did you happen to send an anonymous letter to the investors saying that the project was actually mine?" "What?" "No," Zeke said, genuinely surprised. "Did someone else send it?" "It looks like it," I said thoughtfully. "One of the investors, Holloway, said he received an anonymous letter. Maybe someone else from the office," Zeke suggested. "I wasn't the only one who knew you were working on this project." "Possibly," I agreed. "In any case, it worked in my favor. Holloway offered me funding, directly without Nextech." "Wow!" Zeke exclaimed. "That's amazing. Did you say yes?" "I'm still thinking about it," I replied. "I need to sort out the legal stuff. The contract with Nextech, the agreement with Lloyd." "I understand," Zeke said. "But this is your chance, Prue. Your own project, without people like Lloyd breathing down your neck." "I know," I smiled, "and I think I'm ready to take it." We agreed to meet that evening to celebrate my small victory and discuss future plans. I put my phone away and headed for the bus stop, feeling an unfamiliar lightness, For the first time in a long time, I felt in control of my life. At home, the inevitable conversation with my parents awaited me. I decided to tell them the truth, or almost the truth. I got my job back, I announced at dinner, with a promotion to senior developer. What? My mother looked surprised. How did that happen? It turns out there was a misunderstanding, I said, trying to sound casual. My project turned out to be very valuable to the company, and they decided not only to take me back, but also to recognize my achievements. Project? My father frowned. What project? A program for small businesses that I've been working on for the last 6 months, I explained. There was a presentation for investors today. It was very successful. My parents exchanged glances. I saw disbelief in my father's eyes, but I also noticed a glimmer of pride that I had never seen before. And now you're a senior developer? He asked. Yes, I nodded, with a corresponding raise. Well, my father cleared his throat. That's good. Congratulations. It was the closest thing to approval I had ever received from him. Thank you, I smiled. But there's something else. One of the investors offered me direct funding to develop my project independently of my current company. And you accepted? I'm still thinking about it, I replied. It's a big step. Your own business, your own company. Sounds risky, my father remarked, but without his usual disapproval in his voice. But if you're sure about your idea... I'm sure, I said firmly. Then maybe it's worth the risk, he said unexpectedly. When I was your age, I wanted to start my own business too, but I never did. It was a revelation. My father had never shared such thoughts before. I saw him in a new light, not as an eternally dissatisfied critic, but as a man with his own unfulfilled dreams. I'll think about it, I promised. After dinner, I went up to my room and took out Holloway's business card. The decision had already been made in my mind. I would develop my project on my own, with the support of Holloway Innovations. This was my chance to prove to myself and the world what I was capable of. I dialed the number, and when Holloway answered, I said, "Mr. Holloway, this is Prudence Edmonds. I'd like to discuss your offer. When can we meet?" A week later, I was sitting in the spacious office of Holloway Innovations, signing a funding agreement for my project. Holloway's lawyers helped me sort out the contract with Nextech. It turned out that my dismissal and subsequent reinstatement had created a legal loophole that allowed me to challenge the company's rights to my invention, and the agreement with Lloyd, in which he acknowledged me as the primary inventor, only strengthened my position. Lloyd was furious when he found out about my departure and the deal with Holloway. He threatened legal action, but quickly backed down when Holloway's lawyers hinted at the possibility of a counterclaim for intellectual property theft and emotional distress. Zick also left Nextech and became the first employee of my new company, Prue Logic. It turned out that he was the one who sent the anonymous letter to investors, risking his career for the sake of justice. 3 months later, we released the first version of our app for small businesses. The feedback exceeded all expectations. 6 months later, we had 10 employees and an office in downtown Miramar. I finally moved out of my parents' house and bought my own apartment. One day, as I was walking past the Nextech building, I saw Lloyd coming out of the door with a box of personal belongings. Rumor had it that the company had been unable to recover from its failure with investors and was undergoing massive staff cuts, starting with department heads who had failed to meet expectations. Our eyes met across the street. I didn't feel any malice, just a strange sense of calm. I nodded to him and continued on my way. That evening, sitting in my new office and looking at the night lights of Miramar, I thought about how strange life was. Lloyd's betrayal, which seemed like a disaster, ultimately led me to greater success than I could have imagined. Sometimes you have to lose what you have to get what you really deserve. My phone rang. My father's name appeared on the screen. For the first time in a long time, I answered his call with a smile.